There are some homes where the air itself tells a story, not in words, but in scents that cling not only to curtains and carpets, but to character. They do not merely drift, they dwell, and in some homes these scents do not whisper comfort. They scream warning. The first scent is the burned herb, a smell of constant smoke, sage and fire, lit not for cleanliness, but for summoning. Many today call it cleansing, but cleansing from what, and cleansing to what? If you burn to reject truth, you are not purifying, you are rebelling. In such homes, the act is no longer symbolic. It becomes spiritual warfare in reverse. The smell is not of peace, but protest against divine order. The second scent is more subtle, the musk of isolation. It smells like a room that hasn't been opened in years, though the windows are unlocked. It is the odor of a soul sealed off. The witch in such a home may never wear black or own a wand. But she hides, hoards, and refuses to trust. Fear becomes her familiar, and that smell, that heavy, closed air, is evidence not of safety, but of surrender to solitude. It is not holy silence. It is haunted silence. Then comes the fragrance of fear, a smell masked under too many oils, sprays, and burned bundles. A home filled with protective charms, mirrors turned, bowls of salt in corners. It isn't spiritual power. It is spiritual panic. Fear doesn't smell like holiness. It smells like control, and wherever fear is enthroned, truth is exiled. The witch here does not cast spells to harm, but to control, to predict, to bend fate, to command safety instead of trusting it. Next, the odor of obsession. Every shelf filled with scented candles, essential oils, potion, like jars and lunar charts. At first glance it appears beautiful, intentional even, but upon reflection one sees it for what it is: addiction to appearance, to control, to feelings over faith. The witch of this house is not riding broomsticks. She is bound by idols. Lavender does not replace love. Sage cannot replace sacrifice. The scent may be sweet, but it reveals a heart that has replaced surrender with self-worship. Now consider the perfume of deception. These homes smell wonderful. Baking spices, rosewood, orange zest. But that is the trap. Not every sweet smell is safe. Some use scent as sorcery, to charm, to confuse. To soften your guard, behind every perfect aroma may lie motives masked, resentment brewed under cinnamon, pride poured into peppermint. These witches do not curse, they convince. They do not chant, they charm. They smile while they seduce truth away from your soul. Lastly, there is the aroma of ancestral chains. Some houses smell of old roots, native herbs, foreign resins, passed down through generations, honored as culture, remembered as family. But not everything old is pure, not everything ancient is righteous. Sometimes what smells like heritage is in truth a chain, a ritual disguised as remembrance, a curse wrapped in culture. The witch of this home does not know she is in bondage. She calls it belonging. But let this be said clearly. This speech is not about rooms. It is about realms. Every smell listed here is not about the nose, but the soul. The house is not your home. It is your heart. These witches are not fictional. They are broken, wounded, searching people who have replaced divine alignment with dangerous alternatives. And the point is not condemnation, but clarity. We must open the windows of our inner life. Let in fresh air, let go of fear-based rituals, choose truth over trends, and above all, know this: the house that is filled with the aroma of truth, love, and faith needs no candles to cleanse it, no crystals to align it, no smoke to protect it, for that home is filled with light, and where there is light, no scent of darkness can linger. The scent of burned herbs, when spiritual rebellion becomes daily ritual, it always begins with something that seems harmless. A burning bundle of sage, a stick of Palo Santo, a cluster of herbs set on fire in the name of cleansing. The air fills with smoke, but it's not the smoke that is dangerous. It's the belief behind it. At first, it looks like self-care, a modern ritual for peace, but slowly these habits shift from symbolic to spiritual. The smell of burned herbs starts lingering not just in the fabric of the curtains or the cushions of the couch, but in the attitudes of the people living there. It becomes a presence, it replaces prayer, it replaces conviction, and what was once a flickering tradition now becomes a fire of rebellion. The house begins to smell like disobedience disguised as enlightenment. And what many don't realize is that the smell itself is not the problem. It is what it signifies, a ritual repeated not out of reverence, but out of fear, a need to feel clean, protected, centered, but without the humility to actually submit to truth. The smoke becomes the savior, and the savior is slowly forgotten. This is where the scent screams. This is not about herbs. This is about authority. When one feels the need to burn away invisible energies, it means one has already decided not to surrender to a higher power who orders all things. It means taking matters into one's own hands. It means trust is no longer in the Creator, but in creation. This kind of home does not smell evil in the traditional sense. It smells mystical, wise, ancient. Safe, but that is precisely the danger. The deception is not always in the smell, it's in the meaning. Some say it's just tradition, others say it's how I focus, but the question must be asked, why do you need fire to be still? Why do you need smoke to feel whole? What void are you trying to fill? And why does the smell need to be constant if the peace it brings is real? Because it isn't real peace, it is an illusion. The longer a house smells like constant burning, the more it reveals a spiritual addiction. Just like a person who cannot start their day without a drink, or a hit, or a fix, this too becomes a dependency. A home where burned herbs are always lit is a home where inner unrest is never dealt with, only disguised. It may look controlled, it may even feel empowered, but it's not healing, it's hiding, and those who visit may not notice it at first, but they begin to feel it, the heaviness in the air, the thickness, the confusion. There's a reason these scents linger long after the ritual's end. It's not about fragrance, it's about frequency. These habits call on forces, and not all of them are friendly. In the previous reality we explored the subtle, almost hidden spiritual forces behind domestic life. We learned how unseen habits shape visible outcomes. Here, we now move into the deeper layers, when those habits become practices, and those practices become altars. The burned herbs are not neutral, they are signals, visible markers of invisible allegiances. The witch in this story is not the one from fairy tales. She is the modern individual who, knowingly or unknowingly, has turned inward for answers while turning her back on truth. Her altar is a coffee table, her spell is a morning routine, her religion is autonomy, and the smell of burned herbs, it is the incense of rebellion. This is where the line is drawn. When smoke is burned to ward off what only truth can confront, the heart has already shifted. The house becomes a shrine to independence, not freedom, not joy, not wisdom, just independence from light. And in that independence, darkness feels safe. But that safety is a lie. It is possible for a home to look calm, to smell clean, and yet be spiritually volatile. It is possible to have a minimalist design and a maximum level of warfare. It is possible to burn sage in the morning and still be consumed by fear at night, because rituals without truth are powerless. And power without surrender is rebellion. The scent is only the start, and from here the next scent arises, not from what is burned, but from what is left behind, the musk of isolation, the atmosphere of hiding. The air that no longer moves because the heart no longer opens, and so we continue. The lingering musk of isolation. When loneliness invites darkness, the smoke fades, but the air remains thick, After the burning stops, after the sage, the resin, the ritual, the home doesn't smell clean. It smells still, not still in the peaceful sense, but still in the stagnant sense, like a pond with no flow, like a room where the windows haven't been opened in weeks, like a heart that stopped letting anyone in. There's a reason isolation has a scent. It clings, it doesn't arrive all at once. It builds itself one closed door at a time, a forgotten guest room, a seal, off study, curtains that haven't been pulled back. Lights left dim even at midday. The musk doesn't just belong to dust, it belongs to distance, the kind of distance that feels safer than conversation, quieter than truth, easier than healing, and this is where it connects to what came before. After a person turns to herbs and fire to gain control of what they cannot see, the next step is usually retreat, retreat from community, retreat from correction, retreat from the light of others. Because the rituals, though comforting for a time, do not restore the soul. They reinforce a private world, a secret chamber where the voice of truth is replaced with echoes of the self. This is the house where silence is not sacred, it is strategic. It's not about peace, it's about protection, not from danger but from vulnerability. No one is allowed too close, not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually, and slowly, as the people are kept out, so is light. Fresh air stops flowing, warmth fades, movement ceases, the musk begins to settle, and it is here in the silence that darkness makes its home, not the kind of darkness that roars, but the kind that waits. It waits in corners, it waits in patterns, it waits in moods that shift without warning. This home does not need thunder or shaking windows. The presence is in the stillness, the heaviness, the untouched atmosphere that tells you something once lived here, but no longer does. Many who isolate themselves call it protection. I'm guarding my peace, they say, but the peace they refer to is not peace at all. It's escape, not from chaos, but from conviction, because when you let no one in, no one can correct you. When no one can speak, no one can challenge your choices. The witch of this house may not wear robes or mutter curses, but she controls who has access to her world, and in doing so, she loses touch with reality. People often think rebellion looks loud, but more often it looks silent. It looks like someone who chooses solitude not to heal, but to hide, to remain in control, to avoid transformation. This person slowly drifts from community, and in doing so, drifts from accountability. The spiritual climate of the home shifts from openness to isolation, and while the smell may not burn the nose, it burdens the spirit. This scent, this musk is not the fragrance of a busy home or an abandoned one. It is the smell of self-preservation turned into prison, a home where the only voice that echoes is your own, a home where no outside truth enters and no inner struggle leaves. This is not the smell of peace. It is the aroma of emotional withdrawal, and it invites spiritual decay. You see it in the details, the bookshelves full but unopened, the tea kettle used but always for one, the locked doors, the quiet music, the avoidance of mirrors. It isn't always dramatic, most often it's quiet, but deeply real, because the person in that home has decided it's safer to be alone with shadows than to walk with others in light, and this is where the danger grows. For when smoke becomes your answer and silence becomes your atmosphere, you have unknowingly built a temple, not of worship, but of control, a place where rituals replace relationships, where burned herbs drive away not demons, but people. And in that isolation, darkness does not need to invade, it is invited. This isolation is not random, it is the natural evolution of rebellion dressed as spirituality. When you reject alignment, you withdraw. When you refuse truth, you retreat. The home that once burned herbs to gain power is now closed to anything that might expose the powerlessness behind the performance. And so the air remains still, and stillness becomes a scent, and the scent becomes a signature, and without knowing it, the house no longer merely smells strange. It begins to host strange things, and now from this sealed air of isolation rises the third smell, not one of loneliness, but of fear, not one that hides, but one that binds, the smell of protection turned obsession, the fragrance of control cloaked in protection. The next house does not retreat from danger, it tries to overpower it. And it begins with the scent of fear, the fragrance of fear. When control masquerades as protection, the house is still, the air is thick, the windows are closed, not because of cold, but because of caution. After rebellion sets the fire and isolation locks the doors, fear becomes the host. It walks from room to room like a silent authority. It doesn't shout, but it shapes, and the smell it brings is hard to name because it is not a single scent. It is layers. Burned herbs mixed with stale air, layered with something sharp and sour beneath. It smells like a constant attempt to cover up something that refuses to leave. You see bowls of salt at the corners of rooms, mirrors turned in strange directions, feathers hung from doorknobs, drawings tucked in drawers, and on the surface it's all described as protection. But protection from what? And more importantly, protection from whom? This house no longer smells like a home. It smells like a bunker, and every item in it is not for beauty, but for defense. It's no longer about connection to the spiritual. It's about control over the unknown. Control over outcomes, control over energy, control over people, and fear is the root. Where there is isolation, fear grows fast, and that fear doesn't stay quiet for long. It demands rituals, it demands tools. It demands performance. The smell of fear is not one of terror, it's the scent of obsession, of always doing something just in case, lighting a candle just in case, saying a chant just in case, placing a charm just in case. Fear creates a lifestyle that looks like devotion, but is actually desperation. This fear doesn't want truth, it wants results. It doesn't want surrender, it wants survival. And so the house becomes a stage of strange habits meant to keep the unknown at bay. The witch here is not openly aggressive. She is defensive, hyper-aware, always watching, always shielding. Her rituals are not about desire, they are about dread, and the smell of her space tells that story better than her words ever could. This is the next evolution. The rebellion opened the door, the isolation closed the heart. Now fear locks it all from the inside, and the house begins to suffocate under the weight of imaginary threats. There is no peace here, there is only pressure. There is no rest here, there is only readiness. Even in the quiet, the walls feel anxious. Even in the calm, the floorboards feel tense. Guests don't stay long. They sense it even if they don't understand it. Some say it feels heavy in here. Others say it's like something's watching. But no one can name it, because it is not loud, it is layered, and it is layered in fear. Even the scents used are not for joy, but for function. Oils to block bad energy, incense to repel negative spirits, sprays to cleanse the aura. But the atmosphere never really clears, because what's being burned isn't the real problem, it's what's being believed. And beliefs don't change through smoke, they change through surrender. But fear doesn't surrender. Fear clings. It clings to objects, it clings to rituals, it clings to control, and in that clinging, the person becomes imprisoned by their own protections. The house isn't a sanctuary, it's a cell, decorated, fragrant, curated, but controlled. This form of fear is not always dramatic. It shows up in tiny ways, checking the moon phase before making a decision, avoiding certain numbers, rearranging furniture to realign energy, wearing certain stones to prevent certain moods. It's a fear so disguised in culture and trend that even the one doing it doesn't know they are afraid. And this is where the scent betrays the soul, because if the home is filled with things meant to keep something away, then that something already has power. And if fear drives your rituals, then fear is your God. And that God will never let you rest. The smell of fear is not accidental. It is chosen, layered, maintained, and it always points to a heart that no longer trusts what is good and true. It trusts only what can be controlled. But control is an illusion, and fear is a master that never sleeps. From rebellion came isolation, from isolation came fear, and now from fear comes fixation, not just on defense, but on detail, on precision, on sacred objects, on smells and symbols that no longer serve peace, but power, and in that fixation the smell changes again, and it becomes the odor of obsession. The odor of obsession, when crystals and candles replace character and conscience, fear leads to fixation. What begins as protection turns into pattern. The rituals multiply, the tools increase, the air shifts, and suddenly the house no longer smells like someone who's warding off something. It smells like someone who's worshipping everything. The fear that used to scream for control now whispers something more subtle: obsession. This is not the scent of a single candle. It's the smell of 20 burning simultaneously, some for grounding, others for attracting, others still for cleansing. It's the overwhelming aroma of essential oils that hang on your clothes long after you've left. It's the mixture of patchouli, sandalwood, rose, lavender, frankincense, not chosen for their fragrance, but their function. And the person doesn't even notice anymore. What was once intentional has become automatic. This is what obsession smells like. You begin to see it in the arrangement. Crystals aren't decorations, they're directions. Rose quartz near the bed, amethyst at the window, obsidian at the door. The placement is precise, almost sacred, and every scent in the room has a purpose, but no peace. Everything is doing something, but nothing is doing enough. There's always a new item to add, a new ritual to learn, a new alignment to pursue. This house, though soft in lighting and beautiful in design, carries tension in the air. It's the tension of someone who's trying too hard to feel secure. The witch here doesn't fly on broomsticks. She scrolls endlessly through spiritual trends, always searching for the next object, the next formula, the next thing that might finally work. The house smells good, but it doesn't feel free, and this is the tragic irony. The home is filled with things that promise energy, alignment, and balance, yet the person who owns them feels constantly off balance. The air is perfumed, but the soul is panicked. Every day begins with lighting candles, rubbing oils, arranging crystals, repeating affirmations. And yet anxiety remains, depression lingers, identity flickers. This is because obsession, even when spiritual in appearance, is rooted in emptiness. And emptiness cannot be filled by more stuff. It can only be filled by truth. The more the person obsesses over their environment, the less they address their internal life, and so the home becomes a shrine not to truth, but to techniques. And the smell of obsession confirms it. You can see the connection from before. After rebellion lights the fire and isolation locks the spirit inside, fear drives the rituals, but fear is never satisfied. So it demands more protection, more cleansing, more candles, more charms, until eventually fear gives birth to obsession. And obsession doesn't burn sage once a week, it burns it daily. Obsession doesn't light one candle, it lights 5, each for a different purpose. Obsession doesn't pray, it performs, not from the soul, but from compulsion. There's a rigidity to it, a system, a schedule. Certain candles must burn for exactly 7 minutes. Oils must be applied to specific pulse points. Incantations are whispered, not with belief, but with panic. The house becomes a place of constant spiritual activity, but not divine relationship, and over time, even the person doesn't realize how tightly they are gripping their routines. If one step is missed, anxiety returns. If one crystal breaks, panic follows, because now the person doesn't just use these things, they depend on them. The obsession is not always visible. Sometimes it's in the way someone refuses to travel without their tools. Sometimes it's how their mood changes if the incense didn't burn evenly. Sometimes it's how they avoid certain people or words that might disrupt their frequency. This is no longer spirituality. It is superstition in luxury clothing. It is bondage wrapped in beauty. The smell reveals it. When a house constantly smells like smoke, oils, wax, and burning herbs layered upon each other, it is no longer about ambience. It is about atmosphere control. And the deeper tragedy is that no matter how much is done, it's never enough, because obsession has no finish line. It only has loops. The home that once burned herbs out of rebellion, that closed its windows in isolation, that performed rituals out of fear, is now obsessed with perfecting its own sense of control. But in chasing spiritual perfection, the soul decays. Character is neglected, conscience is ignored, and the deeper self, the one meant for truth, is buried beneath rituals repeated without reason. And then something strange begins to happen. The obsession, while meant to guard the heart, begins to change it. The person no longer simply seeks peace. They start seeking influence, charm, power. They want not just to protect, but to direct, not just to defend, but to manipulate. And with that shift, the scent changes again. From obsession arises deception. The perfume of deception, when sweetness masks sorcery, the smell is no longer overwhelming. It's soft now, sweet, inviting. The intensity of smoke and oils has given way to something carefully curated. Warm cinnamon, vanilla, honeyed rose, citrus peel, baked spice. It reminds you of comfort, a holiday kitchen, a grandmother's hug, a boutique store designed to calm the senses. But beneath the sweetness is something far more dangerous: deception. The obsession that began with crystals and candles has now matured. It's no longer driven by panic or anxiety. It's become calculated, controlled, disguised. What used to be frantic is now seductive. The fear has learned how to smile. The obsession has learned how to charm. And the house that once looked heavy now looks harmless. But it isn't. This is where the shift occurs, from inner desperation to outward influence. The person no longer hides their spirituality, they use it. They display it, they make it look attractive. What used to be a private search for safety is now public sorcery wrapped in lifestyle. The incense isn't just burned, it's branded. The candles aren't for cleansing, they're curated. The smell isn't protection, it's persuasion. The deception begins small, a comment here about positive energy, a casual suggestion about manifesting peace. Then a collection of aesthetic objects, tarot decks placed next to coffee mugs, spell jars arranged like decor, altar corners disguised as vision boards. The whole house is dressed in light, but that light is artificial. It glows, but it does not warm. It welcomes, but it does not free. And that's what makes it so dangerous, because the person now knows what they're doing. They are no longer a victim of fear. They are an architect of influence. They do not light candles to soothe themselves. They light them to attract others, not in service of peace, but in service of power. The same rituals that once comforted their brokenness are now used to mask their control. And the house becomes a trap disguised as a retreat. Guests feel relaxed. They compliment the smell. They ask where the oils came from. They admire the balance of spiritual and elegant. But they don't realize that something deeper is happening. They're not just being welcomed, they're being shifted. The atmosphere is not neutral. It is persuasive. And persuasion, in the hands of a deceived soul, becomes manipulation. The person becomes selective with their truths. They speak just enough wisdom to sound grounded, but never enough to convict. They quote spiritual principles, but never sacred ones. They'll talk about the universe, energy, manifestation, but never about surrender, holiness, or repentance. And so deception grows, not through lies, but through partial truths, not through darkness, but through diluted light. The house no longer has the raw scent of rebellion. The air is filtered now, balanced. Beautiful, but that's what makes it effective, because no one suspects danger in a house that smells like vanilla and spice. No one suspects sorcery in a voice that whispers affirmations. No one expects manipulation from someone who hands you tea and says, "Everything is energy." But everything is not just energy. Everything is alignment, and alignment with deception is still deception. The candles are expensive, the oils are pure, the decor is intentional, but the soul behind it all is still lost. Still afraid, still controlling, only now with a smile. This is the phase where the witch doesn't just protect her space. She begins to teach others to do the same. She becomes a guide, a mentor, a seller of products, of peace, of promises. She packages bondage as beauty, and her home becomes a showroom of spiritual independence. Not freedom from darkness, but freedom from truth. It all smells right. That's the point. It all looks clean. That's the danger. The guest leaves feeling lighter, unaware that their spirit has absorbed confusion. They say, "I love how that house feels," but they can't explain the uneasiness that follows them home. Because the scent doesn't leave it lingers, not on their skin, but on their discernment. And now the house doesn't just smell sweet, it speaks. It speaks softly, constantly, persuasively, not in words, but in influence. And that influence reaches into the next room, the next space, the next life. The deception expands, and with it a heritage begins, not of wisdom, but of wandering, because what was once rebellion became isolation. What was once fear became obsession, and now that obsession is dressed in perfume, not to invite truth, but to disguise tradition, not to confront, but to continue. And as that perfume fills the halls, a new smell begins to emerge. Not from something added, but from something old, an ancestral aroma, a weight from the past, a scent not born in this generation, but inherited. And that scent is the aroma of ancestral chains. The aroma of ancestral chains. When curses are dressed as culture, the perfume fades, but something heavier begins to rise. It doesn't come from today's ritual. It doesn't burn like herbs or glow like oils. It's older, earthy, damp, thick with memory, a scent that doesn't belong to the present, but clings to it. It smells like worn soil, buried fabric, and wood soaked in generations of silence. This is the aroma that's not chosen, but inherited. It is not sprayed or burned, it is passed down. The deception that dressed itself in sweetness now begins to settle into something far more rooted. The home that once lured with charm now reveals its foundation. Rituals not learned from Instagram or books, but from bloodlines. Practices no longer performed out of fear or desire, but from familiarity. The person doesn't even question where it came from. It's just how we've always done it. It shows up in phrases. My grandmother used to do this. It's just part of our culture. This herb has been in our family for generations. There's a story for every object, a reason for every charm, a lineage for every smell, but none of it is questioned, because to question it would be to dishonor history. And to dishonor history feels like betrayal, but history is not always holy, and what once started as rebellion has now become tradition. The house now smells not only of incense and perfume, but of roots. Of altars passed through generations, of curses hidden in customs, of prayers whispered in languages no longer understood, yet still practiced out of duty. The danger here is subtle, because this stage doesn't feel spiritual, it feels cultural. And culture is rarely challenged. It's too sacred, too personal, too deep, but in that reverence, the truth becomes diluted. Actions are repeated not because they're righteous, but because they're familiar. And when familiarity becomes law, bondage is preserved. You walk into a room and smell clay pots, dried leaves, ancestral oils, sacred symbols carved into furniture. You're told it's family heritage. But heritage without discernment becomes a shrine to ignorance, and many live in houses where what they call heritage is actually a chain, a spiritual weight inherited from people who themselves didn't know they were bound. And now the new generation keeps it alive. The witch here is not experimenting, she's continuing. She doesn't burn sage to rebel, she burns it because her mother did. She doesn't place coins, feathers, threads, or bones on the mantle because of intention. She does it because that's how it's always been done, and slowly the house becomes a time capsule for spirits that were never confronted. Bondage that was never broken, agreements that were never renounced, and the smell tells the truth, because this smell is old. It clings to photos, it lingers in attics, it stains heirlooms, and even when the candles are gone and the oils dry up, this scent remains. Because it is not about the object, it's about the access. Generational curses don't need new rituals to stay alive. They only need silence. They only need agreement masked as reverence. This smell is also protected by emotion. My mother gave me this. My grandfather taught me this chant. Our people have always believed in this symbol. So no one asks the hard questions. No one asks why peace is still absent, why darkness still lingers, why anxiety still runs in the bloodline. The symbols are sacred, but the symptoms remain. This is how the enemy survives. He wraps chains in history. He hides curses in comfort. He dresses bondage as belonging. And the home becomes a museum of unbroken patterns. Even the smells have become seasonal. Certain roots for births, certain leaves for deaths, specific scents for anniversaries, rituals, and harvests. It's all part of the rhythm, but that rhythm does not lead to freedom. It cycles back into captivity, and all of this, at one point, started with one decision, to seek control instead of surrender. The fire of rebellion became the stillness of isolation. The fear of the unknown became a lifestyle of obsession. That obsession turned to deception, and the deception made its home in tradition. And now, tradition has become a stronghold. The person does not feel like a witch. She feels like a daughter, a son, a carrier of the family flame, but the flame has burned the family for generations, and no one has dared to put it out because the smell is no longer smoke, it is inheritance. And unless someone chooses to confront it, to name it, to break it, to bless what is holy and burn what is not, the house will remain sacred on the outside and suffocating on the inside, and the scent will live on.